For this video, we are going to be walking through the core rules for 1 Hour Ancient and Medieval Skirmish Wargames by John Lambshead. Ta-da! Hello gamers, Matthew here from Grey Army Gaming. For this video today, we're going to be covering this fantastic set of rules for Skirmish Wargames. In a previous video, I have covered John Lambshead's original rules 1 Hour Skirmish Wargames. The difference between these two sets of rules really has to do with genre, style of play, and time period. This set of rules is really good for all of your post-Black Powder games. So we were talking about Napoleonics, World War I, World War II, even your sci-fi kind of games. The point here is that a lot of the focus is going to fall onto shooting and the power of ranged weapons. In contrast, this game is going to focus much more on the hand-to-hand combat aspect. So this is going to be much less focus on shooting and picking off individuals and much more about getting into hand-to-hand combat. So what I would like to do today is to go ahead and walk through the rules of this booklet and to show you everything that you need to get started and to get playing so that you can have your own great fantasy and medieval war games. Let's go ahead and begin with the setup. With respect to the battlefield, a 3-foot by 3-foot or 4-foot by 4-foot square will work perfectly for your games. If you have a battle mat, throw that down. It always gives it some nice cinematic feel. Otherwise, any flat surface will do just fine. Moreover, the battlefield should be well cluttered by terrain to give cover for the combatants, both to block line of sight and to channel movement. So examples might include woods, buildings, ruins, walls and rocks, crop fields, or olive groves. Terrain affects movement and line of sight for firing, and there are 4 different kinds of terrain: open terrain, difficult terrain, obstacle terrain, and impassable terrain. Open terrain is exactly as it sounds, an open area with no hindrances. Movement is perfectly normal and there's no negative effect. Difficult terrain has movement when crossed. So for example, in this case, if I were moving through this field of crops, my normal 6-inch movement would be dropped down to 3 inches. Obstacles such as fences or barricades that are higher than waist high but lower than head high take a full move to cross. Impassable terrain such as deep pools of water cannot be entered. The first 3 categories of terrain, open, difficult, and obstacle, may also be classified as dangerous terrain, which means you'll have to take a dangerous terrain test if you are moving through them. Be sure to talk through all of the different terrain pieces with your opponent before the game begins. Moreover, terrain may also be divided into 2 separate types: area terrain and linear terrain. Area terrain is concentrated in one area. It could include things like piles of rubble, or in this case, a cluster of trees. The size can vary from a couple inches to many inches. Now, area terrain does not affect hand-to-hand combat. However, it may affect line of sight and shooting if the area terrain is high enough that it is not able to be seen over. Linear terrain, in contrast to area terrain, consists of landscape features that form long lines. This might include things like trenches, gullies, streams, in this case, a wall. And these can serve as obstacles, and they can block line of sight if they are high enough, but they have no effect on fighting hand-to-hand combat. With respect to models, it is possible to use models from any game system. The author, however, recommends using 28mm scale because that coincides well with both the movement and shooting distances, but it is possible to scale up and scale down appropriately. Moreover, you might want to have different kinds of models that have different kinds of weapons or are posing in different ways. Perhaps they are mounted in order to coincide with the options that you give your troops at the start of the game. This is a diceless system that instead uses playing cards for the random elements. Each player is going to have his or her own individual deck. These will be a normal set of 52 cards, plus in each deck you're going to have 1 joker. So during the game, players will be flipping cards depending on how many cards they need to flip for each of their actions. And very oftentimes, the players will be comparing their flips with each other, and the higher card ends up winning. In the case of a numerical tie, follow the bridge order of suits. So spades beats hearts beats diamonds beats clubs. You can remember this by superheroes don't cry. In the case of both numerical and suit tie, go ahead and draw an additional card, and the higher card wins. So in this case, blue will win with the queen. If these two were to tie again, then draw another card and another card until it is eventually resolved. If at any point in the game any player draws a joker, the turn that is now being played immediately ends. There are two different methods involved for shuffling the decks, and it is important that you agree with your opponent before the game begins on which method you want to use. The first method is simply that you will use all of the cards in your deck before you then are able to shuffle them. So for example, we might be playing our cards here, and we might hit a joker. At this point, we would end that turn, and we would resolve everything that needs to be resolved. In the next turn, then, we would continue with the deck as it is, flipping over these cards until we have used up all the cards, at which point we will then shuffle the deck again. The benefit of this method is that you use all of the cards, and that means that the probabilities will be based upon the entire deck. The second method is this, that you will be playing your cards like normally, and when a joker is revealed, you will resolve the effects of that at the end of the turn, and then once the joker is pulled, you and your opponents will go ahead and shuffle the cards back in and get a fresh deck. The benefit of this method is that it makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to get an advantage from counting cards. So that might level the playing field a bit. Go ahead and just decide with your opponent what kind of shuffling method you want to use, and then be consistent with it during the game. Winning and losing. There are several different ways that the game can come to an end. One player may achieve a scenario objective that you have agreed upon beforehand. Another player's warband may break or be completely destroyed, or you may end the game after a specified number of turns and add up the remaining points. We will explain a little bit more later on what it means to break with your warband and also how points are tallied. The turn sequence. Here is a summary of the steps involved in each of the turns. First, both players draw a card each for initiative. Second, the initiative winner, who had the higher card, has an action phase. The player is able to draw a card to see how many action points may be used. The player then activates a model to move, to charge, or shoot, and the player may repeat this with further models until they pass or all action points are expended. Third, the initiative loser then has an action phase, as described above already with the first player. Fourth, you go back and forth repeating these action phases until either player draws a joker. Fifth, when a joker is drawn, play stops immediately and you move to the end of the turn. Sixth, the end of the turn. Each player tests for warband morale. If either or both warbands break, you will go to the end of the game. If both warbands pass morale tests, then each player tests shocked models for recovery or removal. After this is completed, then we go back to the beginning and pull a new card for initiative in a new turn. All right, let's go ahead and walk through the turn by giving some concrete examples. Let's begin with initiative at the beginning of the turn. Each player flips over a card and compares the results. As you see here, the 8 is higher than the 3, so the red team will begin with the first phase. Having won the initiative, we can then discard that card and draw our next card to see how many activation points the player has for this phase. And we have a total of 9 activation points. When continuing the turn, it is always helpful to place this card close by so that you remember how many activation points that you have. One quick rule which we should mention before continuing on is the rule called Zone of Control. Now, each model has a 1-inch perimeter around it that cannot be entered by any other model unless that model is entering into combat. This rule is extremely important because it means that a limited number of soldiers can protect a choke point, or in this case, the entrance to a gate, because as you see here, the orc entering is unable to pass through them without going through one of their zones of control. In that case, if the orc wants to push in, he will have to go into combat. Perhaps the high elves are protecting somebody or something important behind them, which means they will delay the attack of the orc and be able to try to fight him off. With 9 activation points, we may now begin by activating one of our models, and we can do a combination of things with this model, a combination of moving, combat, and shooting. When we have finished all of their actions that we can do with this first model, if we have activation points left over, we may then go and activate a second model, or a third model, a fourth model, so on and so forth. At this point, the player has either used up all of his or her activation points or has passed on to the next player, and then the next player will begin by activating one model, carrying out all the activations, activating a second model, so on and so forth. But remember, if at any point in either of these turns a joker is pulled by either player, the turn immediately ends. A note about shocked models and casualties. Shocked models are any models that fail to defend from a shot or in close combat. We represent shocked models by lying the model on its side. A shocked model has no zone of control and is unable to be activated. However, the model is able to defend. If a model at any point becomes a casualty, we represent this by removing the model from play. Movement. Movement is slightly different for infantry as it is for cavalry. So let's go ahead and explain the movement rules for each of these types of troops. In open terrain, infantry may move up to 6 inches with 1 activation. This movement, of course, is halved if the figurine is moving through difficult terrain. The first movement costs 1 activation point. It is possible to move again after that, but this movement will then cost 3 additional activation points. And finally, it is possible to move that same figurine a 3rd time, but this time it will cost a total of 5 activation points. So if you are counting, if you want to move your model 3 times, that will be a total of 9 activation points. And to repeat once again, open terrain has no penalty for movement. Difficult terrain is at half movement, and an obstacle requires an entire move to come across. Dangerous terrain. This can include quicksand, deep and fast-flowing water, collapsing structures and buildings, etc., etc. Before the model moves into dangerous terrain, or when the model is moving beginning in dangerous terrain, go ahead and draw a card to test for any effects. And here you see a list over the possible effects. If you draw an ace, the model is immediately considered a casualty and taken out of play. If you pull a 2 to a 3, the model is shocked, laid on its side, and it ends its activation. If you pull a 4 or a 5, we will say that the model halts in terror, ending its activation. And if you pull a 6 to a king, the model continues to cross the dangerous terrain, and you will need to apply any difficult terrain effects if that applies to this particular terrain. Cavalry has a longer base movement. With 1 activation, cavalry is able to move up to 9 inches. And once again, it is possible to move cavalry several times, up to 3, but the activation cost will also go up from 1 point the first time to 3 the second time to 5 the third time. Just like infantry, cavalry traverses difficult terrain at half speed. For cavalry, obstacles are the traditional terrain pieces such as walls, banks, or fences that are up to the body height of the horse. In addition, a horse may cross gullies or fissures or streams more than 2 inches wide but less than 4 inches across. When a cavalry attempts to jump over an obstacle, this will require a dangerous terrain test. Effects for the dangerous terrain can be summarized as follows. On an ace, the horse falls and the model is immediately removed as a casualty from play. On a pull of a 2 or a 3, the horse stumbles and is shocked, ending its activation. On a 4 to a 5, the horse refuses to cross the obstacle, ending its activation. And on a 6 to a king, the model crosses at whatever movement rate applies to the type of terrain that it is in. Model facing. Models have front arc and a rear arc, each of 180 degrees. Broadly speaking, models can see and react to models in their front arc, but not in their rear arc. If you're using square-based models, then it is easy to see the front and the rear of the model. However, if you're using round-based models, then use the shoulders, draw a line through the shoulders to determine what is the front and what is the rear of the figurine. Shooting may only be carried out on figurines that are in your front arc. So in this case, the High Elf could fire at this orc, but not at this orc. However, if the High Elf were to make a movement and to turn around, well, then the High Elf will be able to fire at this orc. With respect to charging, it is only possible to charge a figurine that is in one's front arc at the beginning of the movement phase. So in this case, the High Elf would only be able to charge into this orc. It would not be possible to move around and then charge down here. If a model begins its charge in the rear arc of another model, then this model is considered to be fighting from the rear, and this will give certain benefits later on in the combat. If a model swivels in place and stays put, that will count as one movement activation. However, if the model is going to be moving, it is allowed to have a free swivel and then to move. All of that only counts as one activation. As we mentioned earlier, each figurine has a 1-inch perimeter around it called its zone of control. Now, nothing can enter into the zone of control unless something is coming in to engage in hand-to-hand combat. Once locked into combat, enemies cannot leave one another's zone of control. They are stuck there to fight until the bloody end. Now, this applies to infantry versus infantry. There are a few exceptions with different kinds of models. The first exception is that cavalry and chariots are able to pull out of the zone of control of an infantry. And second, elephants are able to pull out of the zone of control of chariots, cavalry, and infantry. An important point, however, is that if you are pulling out of a zone of control, it is not possible then to charge into another opponent. You must end your turn without entering into combat. Shooting. Shooting is far less powerful in this game as compared to the other 1-hour Skirmish Wargames because these weapons are not using black powder. We are talking about bows, we are talking about slings, we are talking about javelins. So all of the weapons will be less powerful, less accurate, and less deadly. An important point about shooting that is connected to movement is as follows. A model may shoot without moving, or a model may move and then fire. However, a model may not shoot and then move. The point of this is to try to cut back on wimpy combats where people make strikes and then try to pull back into cover. If you are going to fire, you must commit and be out in the open. There are several important points involved in assessing a potential target. First of all, the target must be within the front 180-degree arc of the shooting model. If not, then the shooting model will have to make a movement to bring that target into the front arc. Second, obviously the target must be in range of the shooter's weapons, whether it is 6 inches or 12, 18, 24. If the target is outside of the range, then the shooting player will need to move within range before being able to shoot. And third, obviously, you're going to need to have a line of sight on the target. If you cannot see the target, you cannot fire at the target. Line of sight to a particular model, for example, this model in the back, will be blocked if any other model has any part of its base that comes into the line that is drawn between the shooter and the target. Moreover, if there is any kind of obstacle, whether it is a wall or any other rubble that is above chest height, that will also block line of sight and make it impossible to be able to shoot. With regard to area terrain, such as a clump of trees, special rules apply. A shooter can always target a model in the terrain, irrespective of its height, and a model in the terrain can always target a model within the same terrain or a target outside the terrain in the open. A shooter may not, however, target a model in the open on the other side of any area terrain above chest height. In summary, then, these two models have a clear line of sight on one another. These models have a clear line of sight on one another. However, these models do not have a clear line of sight on one another because they are firing through an entire area terrain. Okay, let's go ahead now and walk through the shooting procedure. We have begun by checking range and line of sight. In this case, this guy is able to fire on him without any problem. Now, the next thing we need to do is to make an opposed card draw with the shooting model drawing the number of cards equal to the weapon's shooting value, and the target drawing the number of cards equal to the model's evade value. Now, there are a lot of different factors that influence how many cards we're going to draw, including the kind of weapon and the kind of armor. For this example, let's just say that we are using a longbow, which will give us 2 cards to draw here on our hitting, and our armor on our high elf, we'll say it is heavy armor, which means we will only have 1 evade card because that makes us pretty slow. So let's go ahead and draw 2 cards. We'll take the higher of the 2. There's a 5 and there is a queen. Okay, so now we have 1 evade card here. Can we beat a queen? No, we have a 5, so that means that the bow connects onto the high elf. Were we to have missed here, then this shooting would have been over. But because we are connecting, now we need to draw the cards for the hit value of the weapon versus the armor value that the high elf has. In this case, we have 2 cards here for the hit value of the longbow. So let's draw these 2 and take the higher of the 2. We have a jack and we have a 7. Okay, a jack of a hearts will be the higher. Now, this is heavy armor, which means we get 3 cards to draw for our armor. And let's see, can we beat a jack? A 6? No. An 8, no, and a 6, no. So the hit successfully goes through. Had we had failed to penetrate the armor, nothing would have happened. But our bow was successful, meaning that this guy is unable to defend, meaning he becomes shocked and we lay him down on his side. Most of the weapons used will have a limitless amount of ammunition, so you may shoot as many arrows or sling stones as possible. However, there may be some single-use weapons such as javelins that when they are used, they are gone. So what you will want to do is to be sure to mark your characters if they use your javelins. However, this is important and a piece of strategy here that is more important that you keep those kind of weapons for close combat and don't use them, throw them if it's not absolutely necessary. Let's go ahead now and move into close combat. Close combat is triggered automatically when a friendly model moves into base contact with an enemy model. To enter into close combat costs no additional points, so you can basically use your movement activation points to move you into base-to-base contact, and in this fashion, combat begins. To reiterate now, locating the target requires 2 things. 1, the attacking model has the defending model in its front arc, which is the case here, and also there is a clear line of sight to the model that is being attacked. Now, it is important to note when you are making your attack, whether you're attacking in the front or the rear arc of the defending model, because that will make a difference in how we play out the combat. Moving into base-to-base contact can occur at the end of any movement. You just have to make sure you have enough movement to get into base-to-base contact. With this guy, we have 6 inches, so he could spend up to 9 points to move 18 inches. In this case, if he's going to be charging, he needs to take the most direct route to come into base-to-base contact with the defending model. Now that we're in base-to-base contact, we are able to carry out the hit versus evade draws of our cards. We will say that the orc has a sword, so he has a single card, and because we have heavy armor, we have a single card for evade. So let's go ahead and pull these up and see what we get. Our attack is a 4, and our defense is a 6. Now, because we charged into combat, we get a bonus of 1 additional card. So let's go ahead and draw our next card. That is a Jack, which means that our hit is successful. So here you can see the advantage of charging into combat. You are always going to get an additional card because you have charged. Here we may also note that if a cavalry unit charges into base-to-base contact, the cavalry unit will get 2 cards for the charge instead of 1. Our attack value for our weapon has exceeded the evade value for the defender, so now we are going to see if we are able to hit and shock. We have a hit value for a sword of 2 cards, and we have heavy armor, which gives us 3 cards to defend. So let's go ahead and draw our 2 cards here. A queen is pretty good, and a 2, no. So the queen will be the highest card. Let's run over here to the other side. Now we get to draw 3 cards. A king. Let's draw the other 2 now because we may draw a joker. No. So the king is successful, meaning that the hit does not go through. The high elf is able to deflect the attack with the armor. If the hit had in fact gone through, then our high elf would be shocked. We would lay him down on his back, on his side like this. However, because he was able to defend, now he gets an opportunity to attack back. So here is how this will work now. The counterattack will always get 1 fewer cards because they are attacking back. Now we have a spear, so that would typically be 2 cards, but because we have 1 fewer card, we only get to draw 1 card. So we will draw this 1 card. It is a jack. Now we have light armor over here, which is an evade of 3. So we get to draw 3 cards. We have to beat a jack. The first one does not beat it. The second one is a queen. So the counterattack does not go through. It bounces off of the leather armor, meaning that these 2 are going to be left in hand-to-hand combat with nothing else happening. Were the high elf's counterattack successful, he would get 2 cards for the value of his spear, and the orc would get 1 card for the value of the armor. If the orc were in fact to lose, we would then place him on his side as shocked. When a model starts a phase in base-to-base contact, such as you see here, the controlling player has 3 options. 1, the player can pass, not activating the model. Or 2, the player can, under certain limited circumstances, activate the model and move away. Or 3, the player may activate the model at a cost of 1 action point and initiate close combat. If, for example, it is the orc's turn here and the orc has been attacked in the rear, the orc may in fact turn to face the model head-on. Now, the orc can do that once in a phase. It cannot turn more than once. And here's the benefit of attacking from the rear. You get the element of surprise. Were this orc to attack this high elf, what this means is that in the combat, the high elf would only be able to draw 1 card for the evade and 1 card for the armor save. Being caught off guard means that you do not have a very good chance to fight. So what this means is that the high elf, if he were to win and somehow fend off the attack, we would then be able to turn him to face the attacker. The high elf, however, does not get a counter attack. A shocked model that is attacked in close combat, such as this high elf, will only draw 1 card for the opposed hit card and 1 card for the opposed card draw to determine the result. And note that a shocked model does not have a facing. A shocked model does not get to counterattack either. So basically, it is identical to being attacked from the rear. Were the shocked model to defend, the shocked model would remain shocked and in base-to-base contact with the attacker. However, were the orc in this case to shock the shocked model again, well, then you simply remove it from play as a casualty. End of turn. A turn ends immediately when either player draws a joker. The player does not complete whatever they were doing, move straight on to the Warband morale tests, then checking for casualties. Taking a Warband morale test sounds at first a bit complicated, but it's really not that difficult. We begin by counting up the number of casualties that we have suffered in the game thus far. For the Wood Elves, let's say that we have suffered 6 casualties. Now what we need to do is we will draw a card and we will add our Warband motivation to that card, and the result has to be greater than 6. If it is greater than 6, we have passed the test. Now each Warband has a certain motivation that it begins with and it has during the game. We will say that our Wood Elves have a motivation of 2. So we will add our card to 2 and we have to beat 6. Now, in addition to that, we have a leader to the right, and the leader has a leadership value of 2. What that means is that we get to draw 2 additional cards, and we will take the highest of all 3 of the cards that we draw. Let me show you how this actually looks with the cards. So here we go. Once again, we have 6 casualties. We have a motivation of 2, so 2 plus whatever card needs to exceed 6, otherwise we break. So let's begin with our first card, which we always get, and that will be a 4 plus 2 is 6, so that does not exceed 6, so that is a fail. But fortunately for us, we have a leader with leadership of 2, so we get to draw 2 more cards. One of these 2 cards has to be higher, otherwise we will fail. The next one is a 2. We add our 2 motivation to that. That is 4. That does not exceed 6. Not so good. We are into our last card, and here is our final card because of our leader. And it is a 6, plus our motivation of 2 is 8. That exceeds 6, so our Warband does not break. After all sides have checked for morale, we then see who wins the game. Were it the case that the High Elves lost morale and ran, well then the Wood Elves would win the game. Were it the opposite and the Wood Elves ran, the High Elves would have taken the game. Were both of them to remain in place, well then we continue the game and fight some more. And were both sides to take off, we would call the game a draw. In the case that the players think a draw is rather boring, one homebrewed rule that I use for this is that I count up the number of points that were killed, and the side that killed the highest number of points wins. That's a little homebrewed rule if you don't want to end the game with a straight up draw. Assuming that nobody has won and play has continued, it is now time to check for casualties. What you will do is go to each of your troops that has been shocked and draw a card. Here is the simple way to remember the result. Red is dead. If you draw a red card, immediately remove the figurine as a casualty. If you draw a black card, you may immediately stand the figurine up, and the figurine will be prepared to fight like normal in the next round. In this case, if you draw a joker, just ignore the joker and draw a different card. So let's go ahead and say that we have our High Elf Spearman who has been shocked. Let's draw a single card, and it is a black card, which means that he will now be able to stand up and fight again like normal in the next turn. In the conclusion of the core rules, there are some special rules for war machines, which includes elephants, chariots, and other kinds of vehicles. There are special rules for special characters, including leaders, standard bearers, musicians, witches, and there are special rules for other special skills, movement skills, shooting skills, close combat skills, that really make the game even more exciting. I will leave those rules unexplained for you and let you pick up the book if you are interested in pursuing those rules for yourself. In addition, John Lambshead has also given us some optional rules that you can add on to the game to make it even more exciting. Along with this, he has a list of all of the model points costs, so you can build armies that are pretty balanced, that you can get exact numbers of points in your competing forces. And in part 3 of the book, he has a bunch of different scenarios that you can play, some of them historically based and some more mythological in nature. Well, there you have it, folks. A quick run through of the core rules for 1 hour ancient medieval skirmish war games by John Lambshead. Now, obviously, there is a lot more to this book that I haven't been able to cover in this video, and if you are interested in this system, I would highly encourage you to go pick up a copy of the book for yourself. I, for one, am going to try to put together some interesting skirmish war games using different war bands that I have in my collection. If you're interested in seeing some of these games played out, then let me know in the comments below which war bands you would like to see face off against each other. If you like this kind of content, please do give me a thumbs up, leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, and I will continue to make more videos like this in the future. And most importantly, thank you for joining us here today at Grey Army Gaming for the future of gaming.